What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another week of Head Kick Radio. I am your host, Stephen Dudley, and this week we got a special episode for you. I'm sitting down with a well-known legend around the Chicago area. He's very respected and all-around great guy, and I'm happy to sit down with him. Everybody, this is Tom Grant. He is a brown belt in Jiu Jitsu under Adem Redzovic. He's currently training at Alliance Chicago. He's a former collegiate fencer at Ohio State, national champion, I do believe. He's a middle school teacher, a father, and a former MMA writer. Tom, what is up, buddy?
How's it going, man? It's good to finally be here.
Dude, I'm excited. I'm glad that you agreed to do this with me.
Yeah, it's nice to hear that I'm respected. I kind of feel like that's the sort of thing you throw in when it's like no tournament credentials.
but you do.
Yeah, I mean, like I did a couple when I was a blue belt, but like no one cares about blue belt.
Well, you did some at brown belt, didn't you?
I did
a couple years ago.
Yeah, I did a couple things. I dipped back in to see if like headspace wise, I could get in there and not freak out and like focus and do what I was doing, because I used to compete in fencing like every weekend. And when I came to jiu-jitsu, one of my main things was I don't actually want to compete that much, because I competed so much in fencing that I kind of burned myself out and it stopped being fun.
So what got you into fencing? Let's start there.
Okay. So like,
hang on. So that was your first form of martial arts, right?
That was my first martial art. That was the first sport I really took seriously. I played baseball. I played basketball. I didn't really care about them. You know, I did it. I probably had the most fun in baseball. I enjoyed baseball, but it was just like hard to get fired up. I don't know. Like I talked to you as a baseball player probably, but like it didn't get me fired up to play it. And then growing up, I liked any like nerdy adventure sort of stuff. Like I was in on, and anything with swords, I was immediately like interested in. And that can go a dark place. Like you can go some dark places with those interests. And it happened to lead me to fencing, which I'm thankful for, because like I said, I know some other people would have those interests that ended up getting into some weird shit.
So did you start it in middle school?
I started in high school. I was not really aware of anywhere around the Chicago area, and it turns out that there were like one or two places, but most of it was actually down in the city, and I was growing up in the suburbs. So I started in high school with a high school program that didn't really have a coach. It was like it had an organizer, but there wasn't really anyone with experience there. So the people you learned from were the seniors on the team. And they just kind of taught you what to do. And then you went to tournaments and you just kind of had to figure it out, which wasn't a great way to do it, especially when like the really rich suburbs had like experienced coaches and they would just kill you. So, and I just decided I wanted to be more serious about it. So I started training year round. I started looking for places to go, looking for coaches. I started looking for more tournaments. And that started getting me to be kind of good in the high school realm, but I wasn't like amazing. There were dudes who were like going to international tournaments, and you know they would just kill me. They would just play with me when we'd go against each other. And I actually one of my good friends from another school, he was a year older than me, so in between his junior and senior, went to a summer camp at Ohio State, and he came back just incredible. And he like ran through, and we didn't have a state championship; we had like a tri-state championship.
I was gonna ask that. Like, is it set up like all other high school sports, where you know you go through like regionals to state?
There weren't enough schools in the area, so the way I was told, a bunch of schools have picked it back up, but apparently there used to be a really vibrant high school fencing scene in Illinois. And then I guess there was an accident and someone got really hurt and the insurance costs went up. I've never confirmed this. This is just the way it was explained to me when I was a kid. And because of that, a bunch of schools dropped it. Like almost all the schools dropped it. And there were essentially 3 to 4 major teams in the Illinois area. And then there were a couple teams in Wisconsin, a couple teams in Indiana. And we made like a tri-state sort of thing. So, and this kid like ended up placing like 3rd or 2nd at that event, when he had usually been floating around in the top 16.
And this is the one that went to the Ohio State camp.
He went to the Ohio State camp, and I actually hit that run. I was actually in his bracket, and he beat me by I don't want to sidetrack us too much, but his weapon actually broke and went into my hand. And I still have the scar. I severed a tendon and a nerve because the blade went down into my palm. So I was eliminated from the tournament when that happened.
I feel like this is why fencing wasn't really a thing, and you're talking about insurance costs. This is why.
Right. Oh, man. And the school we were at was like a military academy in Indiana. Their trainer wasn't even there. Like, it was so fucked up.
So you just ended up in the hospital after
yeah,
this?
we drove all the way back to Chicago. We went to a local hospital, and my parents were not impressed. So.
Oh, man. So after you lost this guy, you asked him where he went.
And he went to Ohio State. So I went to my parents and I'm like, look, like I've never asked for like any sort of camp or anything like that, but like I want to go to Ohio State and I want to do this. I want to do this fencing camp. And they're like, yeah, we can send you. And so Ohio State was one of the elite NCAA programs. Their coach, who became my coach, was the former Soviet Union's Olympic coach, was a 10-time world champion. He had some of his top students there as assistant coaches, and his summer camps, which I ended up working like later in my life, would be some of the team who could stay in the area. It was their way to practice without violating NCAA rules because they'd work the camp. We're working the camp. We're not practicing. By the way, we get there like 2 hours early and work out before the kids show up, sort of thing. And
gotta bend the rules a little bit.
Oh, dude, like if you're not, like, what are you doing there?
Exactly.
Yeah. And then just like competitive fencers from like all around the country who were like going to nationals and going to stuff like would come there. And it was just, I was there for like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and we were just living in the dorms and then just training all day. And it was just like, this is amazing. And I got to like walk around campus, and that was like, I was like, okay, if I don't get, like, I'm applying to Ohio State for my college, and if I don't get in, I don't want to go to college. Like,
oh wow, so it was just one shot only.
Yeah, it was one of those things. My parents weren't super happy with me that like once I got the acceptance letter from Ohio State, I'm like, shut it down, I'm done. That's where I'm going. They're like, don't you want to apply? I'm like, nope, nowhere else. I'm going there.
They wanted you closer to home, and you had your mind made
they
up.
wanted me like to shop my options because I did get into some like I got into some really nice schools, but I'm like, no, I'm going to Ohio State. This is what I'm doing. And walking onto the team there because I was not recruited, I placed in the top 8 in like I made all conference my senior year. But like again, the same kids who were like always beating me. I beat a couple of them. The kids I was like neck and neck with after I went to Ohio State, I passed them by. But those kids that were like doing international competitions, they were still way past me, still could just crush me. So I was not recruited. I walked on, and that was super difficult because it was just like the coaches were supportive, but it was one of those things where it was like, dude, there's levels to this game, and you're not at this level.
So did you redshirt? What happened?
I didn't. They didn't. I wasn't good enough to redshirt. I just spent my freshman year being broken down to like base components and then built back up. So it was like we're gonna start at footwork and then work our way back up. And part of it was just like there was an assistant coach there who, like, the main coach Naslimov, like had a big impact on me. I really respect him. For the most part was like, look, I got to work with our top guys. Like the people who are actually going to go to NCAAs and win us titles. Like that's who I got to work with. Like you can work with the assistant coaches until we're sure you're going to stick around. So like my first year was kind of them just seeing if I would quit. And you know, it was one of those things where it was just like, no one was slowing it down for you. You just had to like, just take your lumps and keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. And that's kind of like, I feel like that experience built some of like my, like just a mental attitude that I have that I kind of brought to jiu-jitsu. It's like, I don't care if I suck at this. I'm just going to keep going. Just keep going. Because
you eventually knew you were going to get better like you did at fencing. So
yeah,
that was your freshman. Where were you majoring in?
History.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you know that like right from the bat, like, hey, this is what I want to major in?
I had this whole idea that I was going to get into law, and like history was like the number one thing accepted into law school. And then about partway through, if we have anyone in the law profession listening, I apologize, but everyone I met going into law is a fucking asshole. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. And it eventually led me to education and teaching.
We'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah.
So your sophomore year comes around.
My sophomore year, that's when I started like being able to, I started like my freshman year, I went to some of the tournaments, but like the big travel events I didn't go to because you need to be like 4th or 5th on the depth chart. Like, because the top 3 people on the depth chart, that was your A squad. That was the squad you sent against like Notre Dame, Penn State, the other elite teams. And then the 4th guy had to be good enough to cycle in if one of them got hurt. And then you brought maybe a 5th guy to cycle in against teams if you wanted to rest some people.
So there weren't any weight classes. It was just literally the top 5.
No,
best guys.
This is something that I've heard other people talk about who've come to jiu-jitsu through other sports, where it's like there are no weight classes, no skill divisions. Your first fencing tournament ever, your first fencing tournament ever may be against an Olympian in your first round.
See, that's crazy because like, you know, at least like height-wise, you'd think that somebody with longer arms.
Oh yeah, it totally helps. Just you figure it out.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah,
I'm starting to like fencing.
And again, like it's that like your first tournament, they tend to do a pool bracket sort of thing where you do a pool and then you seed into the bracket off of the pool. This is like your standard fencing tournament. So usually, if you're really new, you don't win a single match your first tournament. You get wiped in pools, and then you get paired with the top dude in the first round, and you get maybe 3 points. And it's the first to 15 in a bracket. You get maybe 3 points, and then you go home, and you're like, huh.
Like that wasn't a good showing.
Yeah, no, and it is one of those things that like it became because in my high school, like when you're junior, senior, you were basically running I was in Sabre, I was basically running the Sabre squad with a couple other of the upperclassmen, and we tell the freshmen like, dude, if you win one match your first tournament, you did great. Like you go to your first tournament, like you think I'll win? No, you're not winning, dude. I'm sorry. And some of them like, oh, I'm gonna win. We're like, okay,
you find out the hard way.
Good luck. But yeah, so that's the other thing is that there's no skill division. So you just like you go to tournaments with different expectations. Like you go to tournaments with different goals versus like I like jiu-jitsu and I like the tournament structure, but it also feels like there is this attitude that like you should always win your division because there's like a division just for you. Almost.
Right, instead of the absolute and all that.
Yeah.
You versus anyone.
Yeah, where it's like that, like, if I get someone my weight, my age, and my skill level, I should be able to beat them versus, like, just like, man, here's the tournament of all the people in the Midwest. And then you're like, man, if I made top 8, I did well. I did really well. And then, like, after top 8, if you win or if you lose, you kind of feel like you accomplished around the same level if you made that level. So you have different expectations going into tournaments, and I think that's something that I think will come to jiu-jitsu eventually as it continues to grow. Where like there will stop being this whole thing where it's like, oh man, like, you know, or you'll go to tournaments where you like there are the tournaments that, and this is already happening, where like I remember when I first started, it was like if you won at any tournament, that was badass. And now there's kind of this like, all right, like there's levels to these tournaments. And
yeah,
like
it's like which tournament did you win before we just sit here and say, okay, you're really good at this.
Yeah, like winning and like winning a Naga is not the same level as winning like one of the other major tournaments that comes to Chicago, depending on which rule set you like. You know?
See, because now like when people say like, oh, you know, I won a Naga, I'm like, oh, that's great. That's really good. But then you have, you know, since like Fight to Win and ADCC does, you know, different belt classes. Like I met a blue belt down in Texas recently over the holidays. He's training for ADCC down, and he was like, you know, 145 pounds. Man, he gave me all I could handle and a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, these are the kind of people that should be doing ADCC.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that like, you have there's an informal list in your head of like which tournaments are the ones that actually matter. We're like, and there's nothing really in fencing. You just kind of got to know, like, sort of thing. And I feel like jiu-jitsu is going to get there, is kind of already getting into that phase where it's like, again, it's like, oh yeah, that tournament. Okay, cool. That's like, I definitely have, I want to get back into competing, and I definitely have like a couple tournaments potentially circled on my calendar as like, kind of like, I want to ease back into this. I want to get some tune-ups. I haven't done a point match in forever. So like, I want to get some point tournaments in, but I also don't want to go to the point tournaments where like, you know, I'm going to get like an abject killer in the first round, and I'm not going to get a chance to even like kind of see what my game does in like a point setting.
Right. Are you thinking gi or no gi?
Right now, just because of my training gi, just because most of my training's in the gi right now. Previously, I probably did about even gi and no gi, and now what I'm doing is like 70 to 80% gi training.
Do you like mixing it up?
I do like mixing it up. I like getting a different feel. I like different rule sets. especially now that I'm at a more competition-focused gym. The attire in the class determines the rule set. So when we're in the gi, we're going IBJJF because that's probably the rule set you're going to be doing in gi. And for me, that's been fun, actually, because I spent so much time avoiding the IBJJF rules that now I'm like, okay, I got to actually build a game for this rule set. And it's forcing me to fill in some holes that it actually is helping my game to do that versus just like, just continuing to drill the same heel hooks that I used to do.
Yeah. And you used to train a lot with Riley, right? And all that our dojo kind of stuff, because that's when I met you.
I still do a fair amount of our dojo. Once a week, I'm with Javier Palomo doing our dojo class in Deerfield, and I really that more stand up focused, more just a different perspective on grappling, I think is awesome. One of Riley's big things is like just stand up. Sort of thing where it's like in places where you really don't think about it, where it's just like I'm just gonna stand up, and then that messes with people. They're not used to that, unless you've rolled with like a bunch of like MMA guys who are really good at standing up. But the first time it ever happens to you, if you're used to just jiu-jitsu gym rolling, and you're like, I'm working this guard pay, he just stood up. You can't do that.
Dude, that's something I've actually thought of a lot lately, especially in the gym, because we got some high level guys, because we're all taught by Javi, our leg locks, and I think about that. I got stuck. I'm like, man, what could I have done there? And then it hits me after a while. I'm like, why didn't you just stand up?
Yeah, why don't I just get up? And Riley like has that where if you ever train with him, sometimes he'll just like pop up and stand up and look at you like, why would I stay there? And you're kind of like, I don't know.
I mean, it is. It's so much easier to get out of a leg lock if you can just stand up, turn, and get away.
Yeah.
But a lot of us just get stuck being on our butts on the ground. It's like, oh no, I'm stuck, and then you end up tapping.
Yeah, well, like one of them is like in like no-gi with like I play deep half just because it's one of like when I was starting, it was the cutting edge. Everyone was doing it, and it was one of the first like non-basic positions.
Was this when Tom DeBlas put out like the deep half?
Way before that.
Oh, way before that?
This is like 2009. This is when like Jeff Glover was just, I think Jeff Glover's had just come out, like the original deep half, and like Ryan Hall's. And so it's just a position that like I go back to if I like, and especially there was a phase where like it fell way out of fashion, and then people started, and like I started encountering people who deep half hadn't been used for so long that it was just there, and I started getting back into my game. But I know one of the like Javier does this to me too in no-gi, where it was just like, I'll put them deep half and they'll just stand up, and you'll be like, well, I guess I'm playing X guard now or I'm losing them. Where it's like, well, yeah, in no-gi, that's people are only in deep half by choice.
Yeah, because they're just gonna stay there and then try to progress from there.
Yeah, if they're trying to pressure you, if they're trying to sit on you, they'll be there. But if they don't want to be there, they can start getting away, and you gotta change what you're doing. And that's kind of like that different perspective too. And like I know when I first started training with Javier, oh man, I don't even remember when it was, but this was a while ago, and he was a blue belt. He had just started training at 10th Planet, and he was a blue belt there, and he had never done any gi jiu-jitsu, but he had done a bunch of judo and sambo, and I just remember rolling with him in gi was an interesting experience because he had some areas where he would be the first one to tell you he had holes in his game, and then other areas where it was really strong, and then other areas that were kind of like more around the level of what you expect, like his belt rank. But then you start with him on the feet, and like I remember having this conversation with someone where it was like the judo shows, because like you get taken down into a position by a judo black belt who has like very little ground game, and Javier has way more than a little ground game. But like even going against judo black belts or brown belts who really didn't have much of a ground game, but if they throw you into a position, they have like a solid 30 seconds to a minute where they feel like a black belt on the ground, where they have that transition. They have that where it's like, if you just started rolling on your knees with them, you never would have felt it. And it's that like that different standing to ground transition that they own that I didn't have any experience in. And that's what got me starting to do more stand up, was because I was like, oh man, like I want to learn that transition. I want to start getting better at that, because
It imposes a will right off the bat.
Yeah, and it was totally like, it was these, I would roll with these guys initially from the knees for a long time, and I would, like, you know, I think this was when I was a purple belt, and it was like, oh man, I tool these guys up on the ground, and then we'd start standing, and they would throw me, but then when we would do like, all right, let's full on go, like Sambo rules, we'll do some groundwork too, and when they throw me and then suddenly start catching me and stuff after the throw, and then we're both looking like, whoa, like, you actually armbarred me. And he's like, whoa, I actually armbarred you. And we're like, wow. I'm like, that's different, man. That's, you know, all my jiu-jitsu goes out the window when someone lands on my ribs and knocks the wind out of me. And that's when I really, that was around when I met Javier, when I was like, I had known that stand-up was a hole in my game, and it would just drove home how much value there is in doing that. And so I've stayed in the R Dojo sphere just because, like, I like Riley, I like Javier, and I like the philosophy, even if it doesn't always translate to my personal game. I like just seeing the philosophy and seeing how it interplays, especially now that I'm like in an IBJJF gym, where like some of the stuff that they do might not be the best idea, but like seeing where it works, seeing where it doesn't, and modifying it. And Riley's been, not to speak for him, but it seems like he's also been going through that since he moved to San Francisco and has been training at Bay Jiu Jitsu. I know he's been changing up his game a lot as he's done like a lot more gi jiu-jitsu there with some guys who are really, really good. So again, not to speak for him, I know I've been following his material, and it's definitely been changing, and he's always changing what he does, but I'm now understanding some of the paths he's going along, because it's kind of some of the similar paths I've been working his material in, trying to transition it to like gi jiu-jitsu world.
I think it's kind of cool to see those kind of guys, like they'll get really deep into something, you know, and they'll specialize it, and then they'll work on it for maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years. But then you start seeing them transitioning out and working different things, as, you know, we're still kind of following behind and still trying to get that deep into it as well. And they're already going into something new. And it's fascinating how, like, people that are that deep into it, how their brains work. Yeah. It's like, let me try to get as close to perfection as I can on this. And then once I got that down, let me add to that game with, you know, this. And it kind of reminds me of like the whole, like the 10th planet leg lock system. And then we'll move on to, you know, more rubber guard stuff again. Then we'll get away from it and, you know, back and forth. And like the Danaher guys, the back system, the leg system. It's like just that kind of thing. As soon as everybody's trying to catch up, they're on to the next thing.
Yeah. And I think that's also just especially the Danaher guys I followed for a while. Like Tonan's one of those guys that I remember watching him and being a fan of him when Tonan was the rolling back take and crush your face with a rear naked choke guy. And then all of a sudden he started leg locking everyone, and people were like, whoa, where's this coming from? And yeah, it is a lot of times people move on. They develop something super deep. Like I still remember when the Mendez brothers were like, I don't want to get into the correctness of this, but like a large portion of the community credited them with coming up with the Berimbolo for a while, and they were known as Berimbolo guys. But now I think people like more think of them as guard passing guys. Like I see more people working their guard passing system than anything else probably. And yeah, it's just this evolution where, like, you know, now we've been watching the Meow brothers trying to change up their top game. You know, I remember when they came here a few times to do the Chicago Open, and the Chicago Open, it depends on the year and the timing, but sometimes we get some top black belts coming down here to like kind of use it as a place to experiment. And like I distinctly remember one tournament, I don't remember which year it was, where one of the Meow brothers came down and was just wrestling every match, and like just was not pulling guard for a while until he ran into someone who like was really quite good, and then he pulled guard and was like, all right, I don't want to lose this match. But you know, you can see them come here and like they work on their B game, or they're working on their off game, or their new thing, and they come to something that isn't Pan, something that isn't Worlds, to like experiment and see how it does against resistance.
I think that's a genius thing to do. And speaking of like the guard passing game, did you see that Gordon Ryan's putting out a DVD on his, and then him and Kai Otera had some beef on the leg pummeling?
I don't follow the beef that much, just because Gordon's really good at creating it, because that's kind of the marketing era we're in right now. And but I do know he's putting out his guard passing
Well, see, I want to talk about that because he doesn't deny that Caio Terra was doing it. He just said Caio Terra was doing it without explaining it. He put it into a system. Gordon says he put it into a systematic approach.
Oh man!
So what's your theory on that? Because like it's kind of hard to reinvent the wheel.
This is the age-old debate, isn't it? I mean, like this is who's. There's at least three people that There's at least three people that. There's two or three people that like could realistically claim to be the inventors of the rubber guard, other than Eddie Bravo, but like Eddie systematized it and made it his A game. But you know, I like when it comes to taking credit for things, I think I don't get that dug down, and I usually will just credit whoever I learned it from. And I try not to get too caught up in who created things, because man, there's always someone who can dig out some judo video from like the 1800s of somebody doing it back then.
Right.
You know?
And I think this was going to segue great into, you used to be an MMA writer, and
yes.
you actually were super gracious to me and got me in touch with a few people, you know, for advice over Twitter.
Yeah.
And just like hearing how brutal that world is.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was not surprised, but also like, oh man, when all the advice is like, don't do it.
Yeah, like I was like, whoa.
The industry's going through a rough patch right now.
Super rough, especially with like all the different transitioning and the way like media is trying to evolve. Like they're trying to force it into video more than it is writing nowadays.
I feel like the pivot to video largely died because it was not consumer driven. It was like it was like Facebook, and it was mostly Facebook driven to my understanding. I'm out of it now, but to my understanding, and one of the big criticisms of the big pivot to video was basically the platforms that would share your content wanted video because that created more views for them, but the like consumer base still wants well-written detailed articles, and well-written detailed articles started disappearing. And I feel like it might be swinging back in the other direction where I'm seeing more written pieces, but I'm seeing them not in the MMA sphere. I'm seeing them like in other aspects of the media, where we're starting to get the long form articles are starting to come back.
What do you think that's due to, like long form podcasts and things like that, where people want the unedited, you know, versions?
I think podcasts, I think are kind of, I feel like they're kind of their own thing. Cause like I'm not a podcaster anymore, but like it has that, you have that advantage of like being the thing people can do on their commute or what they can do while they're working out, where I feel like it's kind of its own separate little category because people consume it in a different way. And I'm a big, like, I almost don't listen to music. I'm usually only listening to audiobooks or podcasts.
I'm the same way. Like I'll listen to music when especially if I'm working out and I just don't have that extra that extra energy, then I will go to some music to kind of help pump things up. Yeah. But it's definitely audiobooks, definitely podcasts, you know, on long runs, whatever, you know, gym sessions kind of thing. And realistically, outside of jiu-jitsu, I don't really listen to that much music anymore unless it's in the gym while we're all rolling.
Yeah, while you're rolling. Yeah, that's kind of it.
But I was noticing, because I've taken a blogging class in college recently, and just before graduating, and it was talking about statistics of like if you're going to write a blog, like when to release them and things like that. Yeah. And it was mainly you release them early in the morning, you know, Monday through Thursday, really never a Friday is what they say. Nope. Because it's always for the people at work that can't watch videos and listen to things, but they can read something, you know, without getting in trouble. Was that something you guys noticed, or, you know, when you were writing, like when to release them?
I was never on the big analytics side. When I was at Bloody Elbow, we had people that did that for us, and I was mostly my goal. I managed to turn it into a side hustle for a while, especially when I was like just out of school and not making that much money. It really helped to have that little bit of extra cash coming in. But my main thing was I wanted to write the articles that I wanted to read but didn't exist. Like,
so did you go super in depth?
Yeah, I would go in depth, and I would go very specific. And my main things were there wasn't really anyone doing grappling analysis at all. Like Gracie breakdowns weren't a thing yet.
What years were you a writer from?
I started in like 2010. And then I kept going in some form or fashion all the way up until like, I think like 2-3 years ago. It was right when we were getting ready to have my daughter, and I was like, okay, I got to cut something, and the writing market is drying up anyway, so that's what's going on. because I wanted to keep doing jiu-jitsu, and it's like, well, something has to go to make room for a kid. So I stopped writing. But like when I first started, I was a blue belt, and I was a grappling analysis guy, which I was terrified of doing because like my main goal was don't be an idiot blue belt and think you know everything. Like, I don't know everything. These guys are doing it. These guys are operating on a higher level. And it was kind of happily my background as an athlete like helped me with that, because I knew that there was a huge difference between, to circle back, between club fencing and like actual international competitive fencing. And when I was at Ohio State, I was learning the actual international, like I was in the room with like dudes who either had or went on to win Olympic medals. And like I just saw that they were operating at a different level, and they were essentially doing a different sport than what we had been doing in high school. It was like just a completely different game. And I was able to, in like the very early going, figure out that jiu-jitsu is kind of the same way. Like gym roles are not the same as high-level competitive roles. Like they're just not the same. And the attitude is totally different. So I was like, okay, I can't assume that I know what's happening. So I had like a formula for my pieces, and the first thing was always finding some sort of finding, and YouTube was a good resource, finding someone else to be the expert, finding a video of a black belt showing something really close to what happened and them explaining it. So then they're the expert, and I just bridge the gap between here's this black belt showing how this triangle is done and how this setup is done, and here's it happening in MMA, and I'm going to talk through how this guy appears to have made it work in MMA. And that was kind of what I did for a long time, was I do post-event, like if there was a cool submission, I'd write a write-up on it. And then after a while, I also started doing like history pieces because, especially as the grappling and MMA shifted and guys stopped getting caught in as many submissions, just because the guys were way better defensively and people were starting to change up their training habits. So people weren't just falling into triangles and things like that. I started switching over to like more of like history and writing like history of MMA and how it got going. And I wrote a series that took a chunk by chunk and looking at like how we went from like, you know, how did we go from like weird carny fighting to really highly paid weird carny fighting. And that was really fun, and that taught me a lot about the history of the sport. And like, you would see the like kind of evolutions we were talking about. Like you'd see it happen if you went back and watched all these events in order, and you were watching all of them, and you had a little bit of hindsight to know when a shift was coming, and you could see the beginnings of the shift. The biggest one that was the most interesting was that shift where all of a sudden it was like, oh man, like, strikers are starting to really, really fuck people up. And like a lot of the guys who are just training grappling don't know what's happening. They don't know how to deal with it.
Speaking of that, I was thinking about that the other day, actually, because I started watching around a little bit before the Matt Hughes, Frank Trigg 2 fight. So probably 2002, 2001-ish is when I started watching.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Ultimate Fighter comes. Mm-hmm. And then that's kind of when you start seeing like just the stand-up guys like taking the evolution of it, like the Chuck Liddells, the Tito's, from the ground and pound, that wrestler to that stand-up guy. And I think when that transition happened.
Oh, no, we're talking way earlier. We're talking about like Maurice Smith knocking out Mark Coleman.
Oh, okay. Like, I was talking about like just modern 2000s era.
No, because there was like, I didn't get that far into it, but there have been game shifts since then where like because like the Maurice Smith was not counter wrestling. Like he wasn't stuffing Mark Coleman's takedowns. He just wasn't a total dead fish on the ground and was doing a ton of conditioning. And then he wouldn't be exhausted and he wouldn't get finished. And then he dragged the fight into deep waters. That MMA fights, if it got dragged into deep waters, usually both fighters were just dead exhausted because they were wrestling.
Yeah, then it looked like a sloppy bar fight.
Yeah, they were wrestling really hard. They were grappling really hard. They were also like probably on all the anabolics and like, carrying all that extra muscle mass. So they were just running out of gas. Meanwhile, you had Maurice Smith, who had been a professional kickboxer and was doing like real cardio work. And then the one that is like the one that everyone thinks of is the Maurice Smith-Mark Coleman fight, where Coleman gassed out and couldn't take Maurice down after a while, and then Smith just tooled him up on the feet and knocked him out. But like the first time I can't remember the name of the guy who did it, because it was in an old promotion called Battlecade that actually put on some awesome fights. And that was the first time a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt ever lost a MMA fight to a non-grappler. And he got knocked out, and it was kind of the same thing where it was like, it might have been Maurice Smith. I'm not recalling off the top of my head, but it was the same thing where it was like that. He didn't get submitted. He didn't get beat up on the ground. He was able to survive. He was able to eventually get back to his feet. And then he was just in such better condition than the guy that he could beat him up. And that was like a shift in the training when everyone's like, okay, you got to start doing conditioning. You can't just come into the gym and roll and drill. You have to do conditioning. You have to do weight training. Or you have to do more than just weight training. Cause like a lot of them were doing weight training. There was a great quote that like the shift in attitude was incredible, because like you had back when the Gracies were like one of the elite fight gyms where you had like tons of MMA fighters coming out, and Gold's Gym like offered them a sponsorship and like was like, hey, you want like or like Gold's Gym had like a bunch of old equipment and they offered it to Horian, and they're like, hey man, like put it in your gym, and the line from him was just like, no, we don't do that, we just fight.
I mean, that's crazy to think of now because of like we're talking about how the sport has evolved and where it is now that you have to have that strength and conditioning to be a great fighter. And even in jiu-jitsu, like look at the top jiu-jitsu guys. They're all, hitting the gym. They're not just going in and doing jiu-jitsu anymore.
I feel like it's kind of a similar transition that happened in baseball, where like they were like, oh yeah, no, we should totally like go to the weight room occasionally. And then like we ran into it a little bit in fencing, where like our coach was the Russians have a slightly different attitude towards conditioning, just like more functional things than like just pure weight training.
The more the kettlebell kind of style,
exactly,
and functional movement,
and then throw on top of that our coach was like really old school even for Russia, and was kind of like anytime you could have spent weightlifting, we could have spent doing fencing conditioning. Like we could have been doing that, and we basically begged him to let us have some weight room time, and he did, and it made a huge difference in our game. And I just remember going through that, because we would go like lift in the wrestling room, because we were in the same facility as the Ohio State Wrestling, and they had some weights in there, so we would go there, lift there, or like occasionally go into like the basketball stadium and lift.
Yeah, it made you more explosive.
Yeah, and we got a lifting coach that was like, all right guys, we're gonna work on explosive. Like I've looked at your sport, and we're gonna work on explosiveness, like just 100% endurance and explosiveness. You guys just need to explode like 100 times a match, and then take a 15-minute break, and then do another match, and then take a 15-minute break, and then do another match. So
how long were each matches, by the way? Let's jump back into fencing, because we didn't finish that story, and I'm a little bummed.
Yeah. So we started with me like gutting out my sophomore year, right? So I gutted out my sophomore year, and then I started actually getting pretty decent for a domestic level. Like my line is always like I got okay at it comparatively for the room, and I'm very proud of how mediocre I got. I was fairly, I think my junior year at Summer Nationals, like the U.S. National Championships, I don't remember exactly where I placed. There's two divisions. There's the,
you're good. It happens.
There's the invite only Division 1 for people with like national points trying to make the national team. And at that time, I think there was like 16 to 20 people in that bracket. And then there's the Division 1A that you could qualify for at like that you had to go to qualifying tournaments to go to nationals. So my junior year, I drove down with a couple of the people, like the two other people on the OSU team that didn't automatically qualify for summer nationals because they had points. And we went there and we just like blew through this tournament. We like all took first and second place, because it was like the only time my fencing career I got to roll in and be the big shot, where it was like wearing the Ohio State gear, come in, win the tournament, be like, all right, grab the medal, cool, we're out later, everyone. And then I went to Summer Nationals, and Division 1A, I made like the top 16 or the 32s. But like in any event, like that one year I was like in the top 50 in the country, and that's like the best I ever did. And that was like probably the peak of my fencing, because my senior year I fenced well in season, and then like all the motivation just left. I was like, I'm done. Like there's no more NCAA fencing. Like, what am I gonna do? Because I didn't have the money to travel around and do the.
What year did you won the national championships at Ohio State, right?
Yeah, we won the team championship my senior year. We were in the running every year. We won our conference every year. But like our senior year, it finally all came together. We were like, my senior class was full of some really, really amazing fencers, some really amazing people. We kind of had like that team meeting at the beginning of the season where we're like, all right, like this is it. We only have one more shot. Like, everyone cut out the distractions. Practice is the priority. Like if we know we all have lives after college. We've been putting in the schoolwork. We have this fall and this winter to make sure that we don't fuck up and regret this for the rest of our lives. So like, don't take any hard classes. Make practice the priority. If you got some personal issues, figure them out. If we had people, we actually had like, there was someone on the team who was causing issues and like wasn't the most committed person. And we actually had a player meeting. We're like, you're out, dude. Like, we don't want you on the team anymore. And we're going to tell the coaches that, because we want to be focused on one thing. We want to win. And like kind of that, like, and this was the same person like was complaining about, like we talked about, was complaining about practice hours. Like, oh man, we're going over the NCAA limit. And it's like, we're not supposed to be practicing this much. You can't make us come. And the attitude on the team was, no one's making us come, dude. Like, we want to be here. Like, this is that optional practice you can do.
You had to cut the one cancer off the team out.
And it wasn't the person wasn't like super cancerous, but it was kind of like, all right, we want all the distractions out. We want to win this year. And again, I was not when there was like the starting 3 for the team when you go into most tournaments. At NCAA's, it was 2. You sent your top 2. And I was never that. Some tournaments I went to, I was the 3rd guy. Most tournaments my senior year I went to, I was the 4th guy. The top 2 guys were both national team members from their countries. They were incredible. So, but like, my job outside of not screwing up when I was at the tournaments was I had to be in the room to give them tough rounds. Like, so I just had to be like, my job was to be there, be fresh, be ready to go. So if Mike wanted to train, I was there, and I could give him a reasonably hard look so he would be more prepared for, the next match. And the NCAA format for the national championships, nuts. I legitimately know Olympic athletes who say it's the hardest format they've ever competed in, because it's really intensive, and it's all so the format is you qualify at like sectionals for it. A team can qualify a maximum of 2 people in each weapon. So they combine men's and women's events for this. So a full team is 12 people. You can send 12 people to NCAA's. So they put you in a full round robin of all the men's sabers have to fence each other to 5 points. And 5 points is like nothing. It would be like the analogy I always use is like if you played 1/4 of a football game and then that was the result.
Oh, like, yikes.
Yeah. Like, you really can't mess up. You can't make a mistake. And Olympians have lost to like club level fighters in that, because, we talk about, you make 2 mistakes and you get 2 bad calls, and suddenly it's 4-0 and you have to be perfect for the next 5 touches. And if you mess up, you just lost to this guy who you would never lose to in a 15-point match. You would never lose to them, but they might just eke out those 5 points against you. So it's a really demanding format, and it was at Ohio State that year. So it was just like we had all these things like we can't mess this up, and we just that was just such a focused year, and we ended up winning, and I don't remember if we had any. I think we like lost all of our individual, like all. It's kind of like wrestling, where like after that they have the individual championships. If you place in the top 4 in your weapon, if you're one of the top 4 winningest fencers in your weapon, you go to a mini bracket. And I don't think we won a single individual national championship that year, but at that point we just didn't care. We were just like, we did it. We had won.
Did you get a ring and all that?
Oh yeah, I've got the ring somewhere. I've also got all my conference rings somewhere in my house right now. We moved this summer, so they're packed away in a box. And And I still go back whenever I'm in Ohio. I try to go back and just visit the facility and then be like, oh yeah, there's the 2008 title.
Dude, that's pretty cool. So I want to talk about going to Ohio State is a really cool thing because I grew up in Oklahoma. And so Oklahoma State is wrestling like kingdom, right?
Yeah.
You know, so that's what I'm getting into here is the big schools. There's Oklahoma State, Penn State, Missouri, Ohio State for the most part. And then like, you know, sometimes Cornell is really good in that. Yeah. But like, so when you were going to Ohio State, did you go to any wrestling matches, tournaments?
We went to like one or two. So what they had was number one,
who was the biggest, baddest dude on campus when you were there? Because like the Streebers were there.
I don't remember who was the biggest dude.
Was AJ Agazarm there?
He was.
I heard he wasn't good at wrestling, or he didn't start.
I saw him. So we were in the same facility as the wrestling team.
And by the way, I can't say he wasn't good. He was at Ohio State.
He was like, to my understanding, I don't know. Like I never like got into the wrestling team depth chart, but from what I've heard after the fact, he was a room guy, not like necessarily like a travel guy. Which is still like. I was a room guy, not necessarily a travel guy for the fencing team for a big chunk of my career. So, like, I don't see anything wrong with that. But it was a 3-team facility, and it was like the Winter Olympic sports or the indoor Olympic sports. It was fencing, gymnastics, and wrestling. Man, and just being in the same building as them made me appreciate the fact that like there's not a single NCAA sport that works harder than wrestling. Like they're insane.
I don't think there's a sport in the world that works harder than wrestling.
The coaches were just mean. Like they had really early Saturday morning practice, so they couldn't go out Friday nights. They would schedule practices over football games, so that they couldn't go out and get crazy during football games. Like they just tried to actively make it so that the wrestlers couldn't have a social life. Like the practice schedule was intentionally made so the wrestlers couldn't have fun.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So, I think AJ was one of the wrestlers who like would bounce for like frat parties and stuff. I think I like, so we would get into like
that also sounds about right.
The fencing team, we could occasionally get into frat parties because the wrestlers would be bouncers and they'd let us in because they knew us. So they'd be like, yeah, go on in.
Did you get to escape to football games and things like that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, we got to go. But there was like, so there was this thing that we did where it was like trying to support the other teams. And trying to, because Ohio State has a massive athletic department, and like the students only really go to football and then basketball. And the idea was to draw people into the other sports, was to have days. There's like one specific day where like all the other teams were supposed to go to the one event. And then like hopefully they brought their friends and stuff like that. So we went to wrestling meets there. Everyone's favorite day was football day because they would take us down on the field and like we'd be on the field during the football game, which was terrifying. Like you don't realize how fucking hard they hit until you're standing 10 feet from them and they hit and you feel it. And like you feel the impact in your chest, and you're like, "Man, I'm too small for this game."
And then you were like, "Oh, I understand CTE."
Yeah, I get it.
What year did you go there, or what years?
04 to 08.
Okay, I'm trying to think of who was there. Was it
Troy
Maurice
Smith.
Claret there?
Troy Smith.
Okay,
he
Troy
was
Smith.
my freshman year. He took over the game. He took over from Justin Zwick, and then
is that when he won the Heisman?
No, he won the Heisman his senior year.
Okay.
So I was literally the Troy Smith era, the run where it was the beginning where we just beat Michigan like every year, but like it was we had, when I just come to there, they just lost a game to Michigan. And then, like, they started 4 years in a row, beat them. It was Ted Ginn.
Yeah.
That whole crew. It was a really fun time. It was the only thing was that we got trounced twice in the national championship.
Did Michigan have fencing?
They did. They didn't have a full varsity team. There was a lot of interplay where, like, club teams would compete with varsity teams, but the records didn't count, like, the same way. And my job primarily for most of the time I was at OSU was I murked the club teams, and then I also beat the lesser varsity teams. And then when we faced the real varsity teams, like then we put the real guys in. But like my job was like murk the club fencers.
Is there any hated school worse than Michigan? Because like I want to know who hates them worse, Ohio State or Notre Dame?
Ohio State despises.
Because Notre Dame hates Michigan.
Ohio State. And I mean, like Ohio State and Michigan, it's reciprocal. Like they both really dislike. There's a huge history there. It's like the football program like bases their identity around that rivalry. There's like there's a clock in the locker room that counts down to the Michigan game.
Just that game every year.
That game. In fencing, we actually disliked Notre Dame more than we disliked Michigan.
Oh, because they were better?
They were so Notre Dame was in our conference in fencing, and they were another elite level program that we were we beat them the 4 years I was there. We beat them every year in conference, but my freshman year we beat them in conference, and then they beat us in the national championship, and we finished second to them.
Oh no!
Yeah, that was a rough one. And they had a really, really good team that year. And they always had a good team. Like them and Penn State were like our primary rivals. But Penn State was in their own conference and like they had it to themselves practically.
This doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, no. We were,
so there wasn't a Big Ten in
no,
fencing?
the Big Ten couldn't field enough teams. Like Michigan State had a varsity team. Michigan had a club team that like they were good club fencers. They would win the club national championship every year, and then like our B squad would wipe the floor with them, sort of thing. So So
who was in your conference?
So it was Michigan State was like we kind of had to take them seriously because they had a varsity team, and losses against them, like any losses against them would count. But they were not like they were like a step above a club team. They were not like they weren't like drawing national people. There was a Lake Forest actually had a pretty good team. They had a couple really good people. Notre Dame was the big one that we had to like really gear ourselves up for. There were a couple other teams that I'm blanking on because it was such a weird conference. But yeah, my senior year was like my big check marks. My big check marks going to my senior is I wanted to win a national title. I wanted to be part of that. We did that. I wanted to be all conference, which I managed to do. And I wanted there was outside of the NCAA, there was a ranking system for fencers. And it's not quite belt rankings. It's more of like, have you won a major tournament? And it's really it sounds like a good system when you're like, oh, you're an A-rated fencer. It means you won like an A tournament. It means enough A's were there that it was a high-level tournament. But the system can get cheesed. And then also, if you're from the Midwest, there are no A-level tournaments because they're just, there were B-level tournaments, but not A-level tournaments. So you had to get your A the hard way. You had to go to like a domestic competition, like a North America Cup, where like Canada and the U.S. are sending fencers to, and you had to win that to get your A, which is way harder than living in New Jersey and going to like some local competition that happens to be an A competition because like A fencers create more A fencers because when you beat the A fencers, you get your A. So there were flaws to it, but like I wanted to beat a legitimate A-level fencer in competition. I managed to do that. So like I checked all my boxes in my goals, like for going to Ohio State. Like I accomplished all of them, and like my motivation to keep doing fencing just dropped.
It just at your senior year.
Yeah.
So hang on. So when you got out of college, did you go straight into jiu-jitsu? Like
no, I tried to make fencing work, and it wasn't the same. And this is kind of like when I came into fencing, I wanted to be a little careful because part of my headspace was not right because I'm like, I'm not going to get better at fencing. Like the best I was at fencing is my senior year of college. Like that's it. That's my peak. I'm going into grad school. I'm going to get a job. I'm not going to be able to train the same amount. I'm going to get older. My level of results will probably stay maybe the same as I get more experience, but then we'll just start to decline. And I won't have the same kind of people around me. And I came back to the Chicago scene, which there are some really good people in the Chicago scene, then there's some not so great people, and there's tons of nasty politics. And when I was part of the Ohio State team, like everyone opened their doors because like you're from, you're one of Naslamov's guys, you're training with like these Olympians. Come on in, show us all your secrets, sort of thing.
Show us the dark art.
Yeah, show us the way. And then once I'm out, all of a sudden it's like they don't want anything to do with you. And I found a couple places with people I knew, and like my schedule wasn't lining up, and then I was going to fencing clubs, and I was getting fat because like I'd gotten out of college athletics, and I started putting on the weight, and then like I was getting fat and I wasn't fencing well, and I was just coming home angry. Like I'd lose matches in the club and I would get mad. And it's like, man, I haven't gotten like upset about losing like practice matches in a while. Like that's not good. And it just wasn't making me happy. And then like jiu-jitsu was kind of something that had already been in the back of my head because one of the guys on our team was from Georgia, the country. And it was kind of that like that North Caucasus sort of attitude where like he was really good at fencing, but he also had done some grappling. And he just liked getting in fights. Like he just got in fights all over the fucking place in college. Like he was the frat boy destroyer. Like he'd pick fights with drunk frat boys just to kick the shit out of them. I don't know how he never got arrested. Like looking back on it, like not being a college kid and being like, yeah, people get in fights at frat parties, whatever. Like now being like, I don't know how he didn't get arrested for assault because I saw him lay some fucking kids out. But like, because he was a little guy too, so like everyone thought they could pick on him. But he could grapple, and he liked watching MMA.
So he's the one who got you into it?
He gatewayed me to MMA. Where like I didn't really watch MMA in college because I wasn't sure where to go. Like I started my senior year, I started watching some UFC cards. There was a WEC card that was like my first. I watched the whole card and I'm like, that was fucking incredible. And it was Uriah Faber.
I was gonna say Uriah Faber. That's Uriah Faber,
Miguel Torres. Both of them fought on the card. Miguel Torres fought a Japanese guy whose name is escaping me right now, but I can find the card. Like whenever I look it up, I'm
like Kid Yamamoto. Or?
No, it wasn't Yamamoto. Like, oh man, like Miguel Torres broke this dude's orbital bone.
It's gonna come to me.
Yeah, and then they also had like they had like an ankle lock race at one point. They both had each other in ankle locks. Like it was just insane to me. And then also it helped that like there was a short period where like ESPN Classic was available on like all like cable when I was and like I'd stay up late and watch it, and there'd be classic boxing, but there'd also be kickboxing and Strikeforce kickboxing, like Scott Coker with Kung Lee, like just throwing fools around.
And the K1 fights.
Yeah.
And stuff. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, when they do like modified Sanshao rules and it was just Kung Lee murking some poor American Sanshao guys who had no idea what was happening to them. And then I found out Kung Lee was doing, and so like Kung Lee was a name I knew. And then I found out Kung Lee was doing MMA. I watched some of his fights, and then I watched when Anderson Silva fought Rich Franklin in Columbus. I didn't go, but I managed to watch the fight. And I think it was their second fight. And then I was like all in on Anderson Silva. And that was when it just all started. I just started like going down the rabbit hole. And I found jiu-jitsu was really interesting because I'm like, all right, like I kind of understand what this sport's about. And these guys are tough as shit. And like these submission holds make them fucking panic to get out of them. They like tap urgently to get you to let go, and then when you let go, they're fine. It was like magic. So
it's still magic.
Yeah, it's still magic. But like for me, it was like, holy, like this dude got his orbital bone broken and like got dropped 3 times. But you bend his arm this way, and he freak taps like, oh my god, let go, I quit. And I'm like, and then you let go of him, and he's completely fine. His arm is not injured at all. And I'm like, how do you do that? And I didn't know where to go for it. And then I was living, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, we both graduated. We both got into DePaul for our master's program. We moved to the city and we got jobs in the suburbs. So we're living in the Lakeview area, and we are working up on like the north suburbs at like 2 schools that are kind of close to each other. So we're driving together, and we find a fairly efficient way home that takes me down Lincoln Avenue. And I'm just driving by, and I see there's Gracie Baja Jiu-Jitsu. And I'm like, and every time we drive by, like the windows are fogged out. And I'm like, this might be what I want to do. I'm like, but I don't have any money. Like we're going to grad school, and we're like, we're working I'm working as a teacher's aide, which is an exhausting fucking job. And you get no money for it basically. But then I'm finally like, okay, I'm going to like stop in. And actually, the guy who ran warm-ups that day is still a buddy of mine. He's a black belt now. But, like, I did one class, and I'm like, I like this. But I got to, like, wait a month or 2 when I'll have some money to, like, actually buy the gi, sign up, all that stuff. And then I signed up and then just kept going to class. Got totally hooked. I think I started in the summer. I think it was August. I think I took my first lesson in like the end of winter, and then I was like, man, like I don't think I'm gonna be able to do this until like a money situation resolves, sort of thing, because like grad school and all that, just like
We've all been there.
yeah. So then it helped immensely that like so I started training with Adem then, back when they were Gracie Baja School. And I just actually came to you guys from that same location now. It's still there. And I remember just like initially being like, man, this is kind of like when I would like screw around with my friends in the backyard, and like some of the ways we're twisting the arms, it's like, oh, this makes sense. Like we used to kind of do this, but we didn't know what we were doing.
So when you started going full time, did you just get addicted, super addicted, and jump straight in?
I was one of those like I did the first class. I'm like the warm ups. Like I was in that weird in between where I was like overweight, but I also wasn't out of shape. Like cardio wise, I could still do a bunch of stuff. I was just carrying extra pounds. So we did the warm up. I'm like, okay, I'm kind of sweating, and we did some drills. I'm like, okay, I'm kind of like that was kind of a workout. That was cool, but like I'm used to. And then we did like the 5 minutes of positional sparring, and we got done. I'm like, no, we're done. I want can we go more? Can we like just add another 5 minutes? And then like, you guys got another class after this? Can I stay for like, how do I get more of that? And that was it. That was like, as soon as I live sparred, I was like, okay, I need to do that again. And that was when I was hooked.
You were coming back like every day, or were you doing like 3 days a week, 2 days a week?
When I first started, I think it was the summer, and I was doing like, there was limitations on like how much the new guys could train. Like we couldn't do, they had the Gracie Baja at the time. They're no longer a Gracie Baja associate. Had like the tiered classes, and like you had to be training so long before you could leave the first tier. So I think they had like the first tier classes. I had classes in the evening, and then I was free during the day. So they had 3 fundamental classes a week, which I'm like, okay, I got like I'll go. So I kind of did today what I did today, because of the way my schedule worked out today. I would get there. They would open the gym an hour before class, so I'd get there an hour beforehand, and I would just do the movements that they taught us in warm-ups, like bridges and hip escapes and all that. I would just do that for like an hour. And then I do class, and then like at times I was actually living close enough. I would run to the school and then run back. And then I was able to start doing advanced class, and like that was like half an hour of training and then half an hour of rolling. And I like did that once, and I was like, okay, I can't run here and do that.
that was a lot.
I'm gonna be driving or take the bus on those days. But then at that point, I was doing like every day, every weekday, and then like Saturdays, except Friday. The class on Fridays. This was back when Gracie Baja was like, Nogi was some mystical, horrible place that you had to be a blue belt to be able to comprehend. Which now the Restoviches, I believe, have gone away from that but like that was the Gracie Baja line, was that like you had to be a blue belt to do Nogi. And by the time I got my blue belt, I didn't care about like the color of my belt. I just wanted to be able to train that extra day. I'm like, I just want my blue belt so I can go to class on Fridays too.
That's quiet. It sounds like you're telling stories of the Wild West to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like it was a different time.
It's kind of like, a lot of schools won't teach leg locks to people under blue belt or even under brown belt even.
I mean, that's changing, because I mean, like the IBJJF, you can ankle lock at white belt. So like you better. That's
what I mean. Like even when I first started, it was still, foreign, and it's been 3 years ago. And, of course, talking about Javier earlier, He's my leg lock instructor. That dude's been teaching me leg lock since day one.
Yeah. And that was my, I was exposed to some ankle locks pretty early on, and like there were a lot of different philosophies on how to do an ankle lock, and some of them have been kind of pushed to the wayside now, but like some of them are still around, but like I feel like there was a slightly as a community there was a little less precision in teaching leg locks, and like who taught how to do what. I think my first real exposure to like a really good ankle lock was I went to and actually it's funny because Adem was a bit of a leg lock guy for a bit. There's like still old videos of him as a purple belt hitting heel hooks at like Nagas and stuff, and like really going after heel hooks. And then he kind of changed up his game. I think his knee got hurt a few times. I know when I was training there, like I knew Adem, but I didn't really get to train with him that much because he had like back-to-back really bad knee injuries that took him off the mat for a long time. And when my time at Lincoln Square actually wasn't that long. I was there for about 2 years when I wrapped up, like when I was doing grad school. And then when I got a job, I moved closer to where I was working. And that's when I started training at Deerfield with Barry Phillips, he's really the one that took me from like blue to brown belt. And then like with working with Adem still at times, but like Barry had a big influence on my game. And Barry was like, he kind of also Adem has a line that stuck with me of like, jiu-jitsu is what works. If it works, it's jiu-jitsu.
True story.
Yeah. And that kind of like, and I kind of had some perspective back on my fencing career where I'd like put certain styles into boxes and being like, this is what works. This isn't what works, because I had been put into a pretty tight system. The Soviet system is pretty straightforward and tight, and it works, but there are other approaches to it. And I've since watched the international fencing game change, where the way the Soviets did it is no longer the way. And a lot of the shit they were saying don't do is now the stuff you do.
It's funny how that works, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of had that perspective already changing. And then, so when I came in here, I didn't like some of the lines that were drawn in the jiu-jitsu world of like, well, you don't do this. I was like, well, why not? I'm like, that was like the heel hook and the gi was one of those. It's like, why don't we do it? Well, and this, to be clear, was never the answer I got from like Adem or Eddie, who were just kind of like, look, like, we don't do them because that's what Gracie Baja like rule set was, and now they have a little bit more. They have a little more fluid rule system in their academy, where it's like more of an understanding between partners when you can start heel hooking. But they don't really leave it. It's not open, but it's also not forbidden. It's they could explain it.
And I think that's honestly not a bad way to go about it. Mm-hmm. If you ask me, it's when you start telling people like, hey, you can't do this here no matter what. Most of us are all adults here. Let us work that out.
But my first thing when I was like, why don't people heel hook in the gi? We're like, well, because the gi pants make it so hard to escape. And I'm like, wait, so you're telling me like it breaks people and they can't get out of it? They're like, yeah. I'm like, why are we doing anything else then? Why aren't we just doing this?
Yeah, this sounds like the Golden Gun and Golden Eye.
Yeah, right? Like if this is the golden technique, why aren't we doing it? Which the answer is it's not the golden technique. It's just a technique. But like that sort of stuff bothered me when I was coming up. And Barry has kind of a similar attitude where he's like, as long as we can all train this, like he doesn't, his school had like, when we were blue belts, had like no restrictions on leg locks other than heel hooks. Cause at the time Barry was not familiar enough with them to feel comfortable letting people throw heel hooks all over the place. But like we had like a Gracie Baja guy visit us, and I still have these memories because that's back when I was able to train with Eric Hayner, who's a friend of mine who trains with the Seraphin Association now. And he and I were tooling around with toe holds, and we're both blue belts, and we're just after class, in between classes, we're like experimenting with some ways to like grip and twist to get a better tap and stuff like that, like the things you do. And this like Gracie Baja black belt dude who's like visiting comes by and is like, you guys can't do that, you're blue belts. We kind of look at him like, hey dude, it's our school, like
you can't make the rules.
You're a black belt, but like back off, it's our school, sort of thing. We both kind of just looked at each other like, that was weird. Like, because that was just not the culture that we were brought up in. We were encouraged to do stuff. And now Eric is still like a huge leg lock guy. His leg lock game is great because he went super deep on it. And he and I were both like expanding our games into there before the leg lock boom. And he went like, I remember originally he went the Dean Lister route and I went the Riley Bodycomb route. And we would occasionally still meet up. There were some politics for a little while that made it difficult for, even though we remained friends, that difficult for the two of us to train together. But when we'd compare notes on like the different things we've been learning because we were both like really interested in it. And by the time I got to purple belt was when I was like, all right, I need to learn more leg locks. I need to learn more takedowns. I found a Sambo school that's not very far from me, and I had some extra money over the summer. I'm like, I'm gonna just like, they have like 3 hours of Sambo on a Saturday. I'm just gonna go every Saturday and do like 3 hours of Sambo, and that's where I met Javier, and that's when I was really started getting deep into the leg lock game, and I started going around training with him. It's actually fun. I think if I recall correctly, I think I was at meeting 1 of Leg Lock Club at 10th Planet. Like, I think I was at the very first one where like Josh was out of town and was like, can anyone teach? And Javier's like, I guess I'll show some stuff on Saturdays. Like, cool, you teach on Saturday. And we did, and I came in and it was just Javi demoing heel hooks on me for like 3 hours.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's transition because we're running out of time here.
Yeah.
Who is your biggest jiu-jitsu, like whether it's your idol, whoever you like to watch, study, emulate their game, outside of somebody you know personally or train with? So
there's a lot of people that I like draw from philosophically, but like the guy I love watching is Gianni Grippo. Gianni has reinvented his game so many times, like because he first came to Chicago when he was a purple belt and like did the first Chicago Open, and that's back when he was like a deep half guy. And he has gone through so many different transitions in his game. And I find I play a lot of similar things to him. I like deep half guard. I like single leg X. I like his style of passing, particularly taking the back off of passes the way he does. So I watch a lot of Gianni, and I usually buy up his material really quick when he puts it out.
Where can somebody find his material?
He's mostly on Jiu Jitsu, I believe. And some of his leg drag and his single leg X, while they're a little bit older, still hold up. They're still pretty darn good. I haven't gone back super deep through them to see if they account for like some of the new trends, but like the single leg X stuff is still pretty darn good. And I guess I have not formally actually met Ryan Hall. I've talked with him a lot, but I've never like met him face to face, and I've hung out with his wife on a bunch of occasions, a couple of occasions. But like every time I was in DC, like the one time I was really in DC, he was at TriStar doing a fight camp, and like I ended up just like me and my wife ended up hanging out with his wife for like a day or like for part of a day. And then I went to 50/50 and did a training session there.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, but like Ryan Hall's another guy, but I guess there's a little bit of a personal connection there.
Okay. So what is the Tom getting back into competition in 2019 going to look like?
I'm not quite sure yet. I need to. I've already sabotaged myself like once because I committed to help Javi with a Sambo seminar, and I said like, all right, I'm in, and then like the New Breed tournaments on the same day. I'm like, damn it, New Breed was one of the tournaments I wanted to do as like my first point tournament in forever sort of thing. And I'm like, but I don't want to back out of my commitment with Javi, so I'm gonna not do that one. And I'm gonna look for some. I want to look for some local stuff first, just to tune my game up a little bit and to make some of the point mistakes. Like I'm gonna make mistakes in point competition because I haven't done point competition in so long, and it's gonna be ugly. And the only thing I can do is just go make those mistakes and watch the tape and be like, yeah, I fucked that up.
And you just get better from there.
Yeah, exactly.
What weight are you going to compete at?
I'm currently touching the 180s for the first time in a long time. So like far-flung dream is to get down into that medium, medium weight in IBJJF, middleweight. I don't know if that's going to happen. But right now, medium heavy is lower than I've ever been before. I don't have to deal with getting thrown into a division with like Matt Paul anymore.
that would be a scary thing.
The last time I competed, that is exactly what happened. Where I went to a tournament and it was like I came in at like 198, but it was for like a 205 division, and I was doing the 30 and over brown belt division. And there's one other dude in my bracket, and he didn't show up. And they're like, "Hey, man, you want to go down an age bracket and up a weight class?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" Like, we're just throwing together everyone above 200. And I'm like, I'm 198, but sure. And then it was like Eric Schaefer and Matt Paul and like all of them in that division. I was like, well, this is gonna be a good learning experience.
And I'm sure that's exactly what it was.
Yeah,
those are some big names there.
Yeah, that was I think Schaefer ended up winning the division. I think he put both of his opponents out, and then Matt got me off a Kimura transition. I got out of one of his chokes. Like I managed to gut through one of his chokes, and then he I forget what he put me in. Oh God, it was a scissor choke. It was like the worst scissor choke I've ever experienced in my life because he had the Kimura, and I thought he was going for the arm bar, and then like in the back of my head was like, he's one of Javi's guys, and then like the legs clamped around my neck, and I was like, oh, too late.
Oh, yikes.
Because I'd worked that exact transition with Javier before, because like that was the other thing that like working with, anytime I go against anyone who trains that much with Javier, I'm like, well, most of my tricks are out because they train with the same guy who teaches me all my tricky shit. Like,
oh man, it's like you can't use any tool in your bag. Like, this guy knows that tool.
yeah, exactly. So no, but Matt's a great guy, and I'm glad he's out in Denver now, and like trying to take his MMA career to the next level, because he's a good guy. He's really freaking good, and very, very in addition to being powerful, very technical.
Yeah, Matt's my dude, and I'm so excited for him out in Denver. But Tom, tell the listeners where they can find you.
Oh man, I'm not as available as I used to be on social media. I have a writer page on Facebook that I mostly just share grappling stuff on. So if you just want to like see me sharing, like, hey, like here's a video of Gianni winning worlds and stuff, TP Grant on Facebook, and then the TP Grant Twitter account. I still keep it mostly grappling, but other stuff sneaks in there now that I'm not like trying to continue a writer persona.
I was about to say, you got a pretty good like Twitter.
Yeah, I've still got like over 2,000 followers, even though like Twitter's changed a bunch.
But I mean, you post regularly, and you have some good stuff. Like there was a thread you did a couple of days ago talking like just what you've noticed from like old school MMA to where it is now, and like the transition.
I still occasionally will put stuff out there and like my followership is really good. Like they're really good people, and they want to have honest conversations, which is not most of Twitter. Most of Twitter is just people trying to like
troll you,
score points, and troll each other. Yeah. And then my Instagram account is it's the same thing, TP Grant. It is a private account, so like I got to approve you, but that's mostly because of my
Let's make sure you're not a robot, people.
Yeah, also because of my being a teacher. Like the kids mostly aren't on Facebook and Twitter anymore.
Oh, they're on
like,
Instagram.
I don't want them following me on Instagram. Mostly just because you can get away with it in high school when they're closer to adults, but it's a weird look with like you got your kids following you in that thing. So I make sure to and to be honest, like some of the kids are like, well, I'm gonna make a fake account. I'm like, cool, enjoy pictures of mats. I hope you like pictures of matted rooms, because that's all it's gonna be.
That's all they're getting.
Yeah.
Did they try to troll you? Any of your kids on Twitter?
No, most of them just occasionally I get a notification where I get like bing, and I see the name, like that's one of my kids, and by the time I go in there, they've already withdrawn the follow request, because they hit it. Oh, it's a request, and then they withdraw it because they don't want me to see.
Oh yeah, they're like, oh no, I'm gonna fail class because of this.
Yeah, well, because like it was one of those things that I felt pretty good about it, and then like 2 years ago, a kid finally found me, and then the name was out in the school that like, oh, Mr. Grant's under TP Grant. So then like I just like, all right, I gotta just like I'm not a writer anymore. I'm not trying to go for publicity anymore. So I gotta make that private. At least the Twitter account I'll leave, because the kids aren't on Twitter. They don't care about Twitter.
That's wild. Tom, thank you so much for showing up and having this conversation. I definitely want to do this again.
Yeah.
And the fencing talk, man, that was wild. Because I never have ever talked fencing with anybody, and that was really cool.
Oh, we didn't even scratch the surface. There's a lot there.
Dude, well, I can't wait. Let's get back in there, start competing, and let's next time you want to promote something, whatever, you're more than welcome to come on. This was awesome.
Sounds good, man. Thank you.
All right, everybody. This has been another great week, and I hope that if you hear this, that you give Tom some love, and we out.
Say goodbye to all my friends. Say hello to the stars above.